it's working. Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be here today to talk about transparency and trust, and I hope that some of my findings will be useful even in other fields than democracy. Democracy is built on transparency, and trust is a consequence of transparency. Trust in political institutions, trust in democratic tools that citizens use to express their civic rights. E-voting is no exception to the rule of transparency and trust. That is why open source in e-voting is the only possible way for reliable democratic electronic democracy. During these few minutes, I would like to show you why. Transparency is the foundation of the democratic practices. Transparency has a long history in Switzerland. Indeed, the oldest democratic voting process that we know, you can see it in this picture here, is a system where voters vote publicly in a public place, hands up, in an outside assembly, and that is still used, not in Geneva, but it's still used in some places in Switzerland. Today, Swiss citizens can also vote by the traditional way, with a paper ballot in a ballot box, by postal services, or, which is the newest way, by e-voting. When speaking about Swiss political system, most people think about direct democracy, and they're right. We had more national referendums in Switzerland than all countries who have direct democracy together. So it's quite a big deal. We call that, so in Switzerland, people have the highest political authority. We call that popular sovereignty. So the Swiss political system is a direct democracy, but also combined with a representative democracy. We also have a parliament, which we vote for. No, still is. We vote at least 4 times a year. And if we are in election year, it's 6 times a year. So if you take an average life expectancy, a Swiss citizen will vote 325 times in his life. So Switzerland has very old and very modern democratic tools. You see it on the picture in the middle. People are just around there holding their hands up. It's a very traditional way, but also very modern way with e-voting. With the multitude of democratic tools that characterize the Swiss political system and the frequency which we use our political tools, you could say that Switzerland is a kind of democratic lab. We are pioneer in e-voting. The first ballot in Europe took place on January in 2003. And so we're talking about real online voting. I'm not talking about e-voting as it's understood in the United States, where it's just a voting machine, so you have to go to a voting place, and there you just push on a button, and it counts your voice. No, it's online voting. You vote from your personal computer, from your home, from your office, from the country in which abroad you're on holiday, either on your personal computer, on your tablet, or even on your smartphone. So, although the turnout in elections and referendum in Switzerland is generally lower than in most democratic systems in Europe, it's about 40 to 50%, Switzerland is the country where the trust in political authorities and political institutions is the highest in the world. You can't read it, but you can see the red on the top. So it's 82%. Slovakia, it's 25%. So these are OECD numbers. And I think there are 2 reasons for that. One reason is that citizens have the control over the complete democratic process and the final saying also in political issues due to the direct democracy. Every topic can be proposed by any citizen as long as he can convince about 100,000 citizens to sign a referendum or initiative. The second reason is that the democratic process is very transparent in Switzerland. It means that every Swiss citizen can assist and assess the whole democratic process from the preparation of an election or a referendum through the processing of the ballots to the proclamation of the results, thanks to open and easy judiciable review. So let me give you an example for that. On election days in Switzerland, there are no less than 1,500 citizens that process the ballots of 250 voters in a building of the University of Geneva. Only a third of them are public servants. The other ones are just normal citizens who serve the democracy. Moreover, the whole process is placed under the supervision of an independent electoral commission. This independent commission is composed by people from civil society, partially designed by the cantonal parliament, and partially there are IT experts, lawyers, or project managers. It is this transparency that builds trust in the system and in the institutions. In the context of e-voting, having a secretive democratic process, such as a black box, in which ballots would be hidden from the view of the citizens during the recount, would surely be considered unacceptable. As is the case with traditional votes at the ballot box, the process of recount must be transparent to maintain the trust in the process. So imagine even worse. What if a black box was developed and operated by a private company with no legal obligation to transparency to open the black box? One would surely consider this as a violation of basic civil rights. So what is important for our traditional ways of voting is even more essential with online voting. We cannot have different constraints for online voting. So we have, as I said, a long and rich experience in that field. E-voting was introduced in 2003 in Geneva. Today, about 20% of our citizens use that as a normal way of voting. If you take the Swiss living abroad, there are more than 60%, and in some countries which are quite far from Geneva, there are even 100% of them use e-voting. It's also important for people with disabilities. They have more autonomy if they can vote with e-voting. So to this day, Geneva has organized more than 100 electronic electoral processes, referendums, and elections with its e-voting system called CH Vote. It is used by the canton of Geneva, but also the canton of Bern, Basel, and Lucerne, and soon 3 other cantons in Switzerland. Our CH Vote system is one of the most experienced systems in the world in terms of number of years that it's used and number of types of ballots that is made with. So how did we come up with that idea of open source? One thing was clear from the beginning. In order to ensure the highest level of security and trust, the system has to be developed and operated by the state, and only the state. We didn't want to depend on private companies. In our philosophy, political rights are a domain which should be made no profit and cannot be delegated to a private company. 13 years later, we haven't changed our mind, and today CH Vote is one of the leading e-voting systems in the world, but still for us, that isn't enough. In 2010, a Geneva law allowing every citizen to ask to review himself the source code, so the DNA of the system, came into force. Until this day, 2 reviews had been made of our system. One was the Pirate Party of Switzerland, and the other one was the University of Applied Science of Bern. But for us still, that wasn't enough. We wanted to go even further towards transparency and openness. This is why in 2015, I proposed to the Genevan government to make it mandatory for us to publish the source code on the internet on an open source way. The whole code will be directly accessible on the web for everyone, not only for Genevan people, not only for the citizens who use our system, but for everyone. So this law was adopted by the cantonal parliament in January, and next December we will publish the first elements of this code on a GitHub platform and on an AGPL open source license. We'll proceed step by step until the whole code will be on the internet at the end of 2018. The use of open source is an active transparency, where a public community will be able to consult, exchange, and also improve the source code itself. When deciding to go open source, we have had to face some internal and external oppositions. People were afraid by the potential consequences of opening our system completely. Public servants were afraid that their work would be criticized. Was opening our code, in fact, opening the door of our platform to potential hackers? Our decision was a bold one, but we are convinced that we made the right move, both for the people and for democracy. Therefore, we organized a series of workshops in collaboration with civil society. For the first time, hackers, civil servants, IT experts, journalists, philosophers, and citizens worked together to set the terms and the way the code should be published and organize the process of collaboration with the public community that is at the heart of our open source approach. So transparency is not only the goal we are going to, but it's also the way we want to achieve it. A few years ago, skeptics and opponents of e-voting criticized us. Today we are discussing with them. This discussion was the first step of our transparency approach, and the next step will be to start to work with any willing person interested by this topic, and our aim is really to co-create in order to obtain the best system, open and secure. You could say yesterday, security was closedness. In order to secure a technological system, we had to build thick and high firewalls to protect our so-called technological secrets. It's like the wall of Trump. Today, security is openness. The more we show things how they are done, how they work, the more we learn from expertise outside the group of developers, the more we build trust. If you build fences around a public park and reserve it to a category of people, you risk to suffer from degradation. But if you place the same park in the hands of citizens themselves, it's more likely that they will preserve it. It's no different with e-voting. So we are only at the beginning of our journey. It's a long way to go to open source, but the first conclusions are very encouraging. With the open source, we allow to access to the heart of the platform, and this is a significant element of transparency. Thus, we apply the famous maxim, seeing really is believing, to the area of political rights. Transparency builds trust, and trust builds legitimacy. In our technological age, in which very sophisticated tools like smartphones and apps are part of our daily lives, we must not put a naive and benevolent trust in technology. technology is not democracy. But democracy can benefit from civic technologies. Our choice is to develop civic technologies to turn them into both efficient and solid tools for more dynamic and robust democracy. In order to achieve this, I'm convinced that transparency and open source are essential, as e-voting has shown us, because it initiates a positive and virtuous dynamic between democracy and trust. In this sense, civic techs are the future, but their success depends on the quality of collaboration between citizens and institutions. Open source is a graal to transparency in terms of electronic democracy. Nothing to hide, everything is open. Transparency is thereby the highway to trust. Thank you very much.